We're starting live. Looks like 3, 2, 1. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Jeff, and this is Alan.
And we're both running for Congress.
We're both running for Congress, and I'm calling it the Jeff and Alan Show.
Which is wrong, of course.
You're so disagreeable. Anyway, we're going to start today's program. The date today is July something.
18th?
Yeah.
Something like that.
The 20th.
20th.
Yeah. Okay, Alan's been on vacation, so his circadian rhythms are completely off, which is why we missed the show last week.
I apologize.
I'm taking staycations because I'm dedicated to the cause of freedom and making sure the campaign's going. But Alan, I just want everybody to know when they make their choice on September 10th, Alan takes vacations with his family.
I do. I take them yearly, at least.
I'm amazed they even nominated you to the party. So let's start today on a somber note. I'm going to have to wear my glasses. I apologize for not looking like the rock star that I usually look like. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. I wish I could have responded in a tweet like that to somebody who really disliked me. Why don't you slide over a little bit so you're in the frame there. So that was Ilhan Omar's response to Donald Trump and the rally in Greenville, North Carolina. Don't get Greenville, North Carolina confused with Greenville, South Carolina. This is purely a North Carolina thing. And it was a rally for Trump supporters, but also to endorse Dan Bishop.
That's right.
Who was there. Just to go over the facts of the matter, most people are aware of the headlines, and I know if you're a Trump supporter and you happen to be seeing this, you know what was going on and the flack that has resulted. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, kind of as we experienced it, because and I'm not in my. Excuse us while we adjust our technical issues here. We want to make sure we're in the frame and everyone can hear us clearly. And so this looks a little bright. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Here too.
Yeah. So we've got a little bit of a weird wash on this one.
Oh, yeah.
But pardon our technical incompetence here for the moment. I don't know what to do about this.
I don't know. If you tap the... Oh,
okay. So... we're just having a little bit of a problem here. Sorry. So we're just going to have to let that go the way it is for now, and then maybe upload our YouTube later. In any case, let's get back to the main part of our business here. So we're going to be on for about 30 minutes, and we want to talk about what was happening in Greenville at the rally, and in particular the response to it, because I think in many ways, as I've explained before on Chris Cano's show and to Alan, I don't actually like listening to Trump. I don't actually pay attention when he talks. And early on, he was kind of I remember him from Saturday Night Live being an object of ridicule, and I just never liked his style and swagger. So I have over time just tuned him out. But nevertheless, sometimes, he's constantly on. He's constantly occupying our brain.
it's true.
And there is this phenomenon, which we know, called TDS, which stands for Trump Derangement Syndrome. Many of my colleagues in the party, I believe, suffer from this. And I don't know if they are, some of them are legitimately crazed by the fact that this man occupies their brain and occupies their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So they're triggered by anything that they think he might do, in addition to the things that he actually does. And sometimes they can't see some of the good things that he might be doing or might be doing behind the scenes. And just to give an example, I would say North Korea. I mean, we're going to be talking about military and our presence in the world at a later date. But just to give you a preview, I would argue that he's doing some good things, right? So you can't have that. You can't be absorbed by this mania. So go ahead, Alan. I've been talking too long, and I'll try to kind of fix the color on this while you're talking.
No, I agree with you. I think that to what you're saying, you get a certain amount of maybe we could call it confirmation bias that builds up. You have this idea about a particular person, whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's any other politician or someone in your life, right?
Yeah.
You have this narrative about that person cooked up in your head, and then the things that you experience either reinforce that narrative or they challenge it. What tends to happen, it seems like, is these things just reinforce the narrative that people have that, a certain politician is just an awful person, and anything they do is just awful,
Right. And so, and the media model for covering people like that get a strong reaction is clearly to state whatever happens in the worst possible way. So with that in mind, we have to be fair about what we saw, because people think of it as uniformly terrible, as a warning. Germany in the 30s. Some people really don't like it because they were shouting in a rally type format. So is Trump responsible, or is the crowd responsible, or are they both kind of responsible? And what's really the best thing we can say about it? What's the best face that a Trump supporter, whether it's Dan Bishop or his voters, or even the state Republican Party, what could they possibly say about are they going to say that people are simply overreacting, that the crowd was just having a good time and it was kind of like a basketball game and everybody was just going, doing a cheer, and that's just, is that like a common thing in the South? Is that the kind of stuff that routinely happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think we're even seeing this too, actually, in the media. The very next day, you saw the president trying to back off just a little bit. He's trying to back up in terms of what happened. Right. So I think that they're nervous about what just happened. I see this as they built up some momentum in their party. Maybe it has the wrong weight, the wrong mass to it. Yeah. And that is getting out of control for them. And I think there's one thing that both parties hate, both the Democrats and Republicans, it's losing control of what they want things to be.
That's right. And so that's going to segue us into our next topic, really, which is about dissidents. Dissidents like us, we consider ourselves kind of campaigners who are working for dissident ideas. And then there's also the fact that the party itself has defectors, and there are people who are sitting on the fence. So if you look at my social media over the last several days, there are a lot of discussions with people who are sitting on the fence and who are they've got so we talked about Trump derangement syndrome. There's also squad derangement syndrome, right? SDS, which actually sounds more like a disease, right?
I guess
it's So squad derangement syndrome, people are just exaggerating ridiculously the power. Having said that, there's a case to be made for the fact that AOC in particular is, as a member of the squad, the leading member of the squad, is a very persuasive person, very, very charismatic. And we don't always agree with her. I don't always agree with her. I certainly agree with her on DHS and ICE and some of the other things that she said. But she's promoting, the Green Party New Deal. So she would be, if she doesn't get her way, perhaps, she would be an amazing addition to the Green Party. We didn't talk about this before, but what do you think of that? And the only reason I bring it up now, is something we haven't talked about, is because Justin Amash is also very anti-Trump, and he's a libertarian. He's really a libertarian, registered as a Republican, serving as a Republican, at risk of losing his seat, now even more at risk of losing his seat because of population decline in Michigan. and the fact that the whole state, excuse me, will lose representatives.
Yeah.
So he's a case where libertarians are kind of actively trying to recruit him.
That
So
makes sense.
think
Yeah.
about that.
Well, yeah. So it's interesting. I was chatting incidentally with a reporter from my hometown yesterday, and he asked me a very similar question. He's like, we see people like AOC, we see very progressive people
Yeah.
in the Democratic Party doing things that are very similar to what the Green Party wants to do.
Right.
Where's the overlap there? Is that something you would ever consider? Would you consider primarying somebody in the future? And I think that on the Democratic side, especially, you see something that's very interesting in terms of the fracture in the party, because it's becoming more and more clear. You have the people on the side who think that you can primary people out of the Democratic Party and change it from within. And then you have people maybe who are defectors from the Democratic Party who became Green Party members, like me. I used to be a Democrat. There's no secret about that. You have people who believe that the Democratic Party just cannot be changed from the inside out the way that people think they can change it, because the Democratic Party is so good at co-opting these movements and quashing them, basically.
That's right. So the party is very strong. We both believe that the party is very corrupt. They keep their faithful in line with carrots and sticks.
Right.
The sticks over the past couple of years have been particularly bad in the wake of 2016. So a lot of the antagonism toward the squad is an attempt to keep them in line. They've also not banned, but they put pressure on progressive candidates, people who would work for progressive candidates, essentially blackball them. You can read about this in the Intercept, which is a great publication covering some of the corruption of the DCC and the DNC. They've sent letters saying, you can't work in this town, essentially. So, which is very dangerous. So the question becomes, when are people going to get fed up with that? Are voters ever really going to get fed up with that? Because voters, certainly Dan Bishop's voters, are scared of McCready because they're scared he might partner with the squad, which is why McCready is trying to distance himself from their efforts. So Bishop wants to keep people in line. I've gotten calls and I've gotten social media feedback from people who are deeply, deeply afraid of the squad and what they call the demo rats or the demon rats or whatever they're called. Yeah. So social media is great for these bad words. They have. What does Bishop need to do to keep the troops in line after something like this? Because he needs swing voters. He's not appealing to swing voters. He is, as Chris Cano frequently reminds us, he's playing to his base. You need the base, but you also need the swing voters. Swing voters are looking at this event in Greenville. They don't like the chanting. This is, I think this is a big loss. This is a big turnoff for voters. I don't know. I haven't seen anybody. I can't imagine how anybody would think this is a plus. How can it? Can you imagine it being a plus let me clarify the question. So we're talking about party unity, keeping everybody together. The things that they've done to keep everybody together, the things that they've said about dissident candidates like you and I, and about how we're somehow spoiling the outcome by not allowing the parties to have full reign over what's going on. How long can it last like this? How long can we do this? If you're a conservative voter and your voting party line, you're going in and you're doing straight party ticket. I guess it can last for a long time. There's a certain percentage of voters who are just gonna, they feel like that's the brand and they're gonna vote like that. They're deeply, deeply scared of the other side, partly because of this confirmation bias.
Yeah.
But this could last indefinitely. This might not change in my lifetime.
Right.
What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think that's the unfortunate part of it. And like, I don't see this as a positive for Dan Bishop, but the unfortunate reality is that people's political identities in terms of their party loyalty is more deeply ingrained than any particular ideological value. And so that's why you can see these parties shifting, maybe the Democrats further to the left or the Republicans further to the right. You see these radical ideas that people just sort of adopt as part of their worldview because they're tied to the brand. People have more brand loyalty than they do loyalty to any particular value. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons that it's important for third-party candidates like us to start raising our voices, because then we create a place for that type of discourse so that you're not trying to fit everything into those two pipelines, almost like a relief valve, basically.
Yeah. Well, our mission is to talk about issues. Obviously, this is one of the issues, but this really describes the way we got here. The parties are not open to certain types of ideas, and voters know that they're monumentally hypocritical.
Yeah.
Just to take one issue that came up this week, I think the great popular radio announcer Rush Limbaugh came out against Republican dedication to this idea of fiscal conservatism, that spending actually matters. So you and I might have a difference about that, but at least Rush is saying that all this stuff that we heard about with balancing the budget, knowing where the money's coming from, and being prudent about spending it, he's basically saying that it doesn't really matter if we overspend. No one's losing elections because they're spending too much money. And there's a certain truth to that. No one's losing elections because they're overspending other people's money, right? So if the Libertarian Party exists for anything, that's one of its core principles, that you're not spending other people's money on boondoggles. So Republicans used to be thought of, at least when I was growing up, as the green eye shade. Well, if you don't know what that phrase means, it's just what accountants used to wear when they're doing their accounts. So they're sitting there, balancing the numbers and making sure that everything is hunky-dory. You know where the money's coming in, you know where the money's going out, and you're fiscally tight. So if you're, I think I'm just recalling a joke that the comedian Bill Maher made a few years ago. If you can't get Republicans to watch the money, who can, right? And I guess the answer is, if you are actually a fiscal conservative and you're kind of sick of that hypocrisy that the party just openly promotes. Yes, we're hypocrites. There are no fiscal conservatives left. Then you only have one home right now. You have, which is the Libertarian Party. So what do you think about that?
I think the one thing I'll respond to for sure is thinking about the Republicans. Going back to what I said earlier about the Democrats, I think that the Republicans have a similar problem going on, and maybe theirs has been going on for slightly longer publicly than the Democrats, is that they have this brand identity problem.
Yeah.
In that the Republicans are not sure who they are. And so you have situations like you just described, because it used to be that you could view Republicans in a particular way. I think about like Reagan Republicans, think about fiscal conservatism, and that's shifting away. And where we are today is there are a lot of people who considered themselves Republicans up until the time that Donald Trump got elected, and now they are just sort of like drifters, basically. And you have Democrats in the same way. People are not sure where they stand because these parties don't necessarily represent their values, and maybe that's a good thing.
I would agree it's a good thing. We know just from voter registrations that they only make up, I think, somewhere between 60 and 63% of the even in the state of North Carolina,
That's right.
where I think brand identity works very powerfully.
And in our district, I looked at the numbers the other day, and unaffiliated voters outnumber Republicans.
That's right.
And almost Democrats. Democrats still have a little bit of a lead.
That's right. And I think that happened just in the last 2 years.
It did, yeah.
So people are very frustrated with their parties, but when it comes right down to it, they go into the voting booth and they still follow. And part of it is because of the news stories that we saw just this week about what was going on. Did we really ever get to answer the question, what's like the best thing you can say about this? That Republicans were just having a little rally, and they weren't really being racist. I don't want to open this whole can of worms about accusing everybody of being racist who might be participating in a chant, but I'm wondering, and I posted, I trolled Dan Bishop's campaign page, obviously, and Dan McCready's, and I just asked them, were you chanting "Send her back"? I just want to know if Dan Bishop was there and he was in the crowd, and whether he was chanting that too.
Mm-hmm.
And what did he mean by that? What would you, if you were in a crowd and you were saying "Send her back"? So,
yeah.
So I think there's just a heightened hostility right now, turning off a lot of voters. But it's not clear to me how third parties can capitalize on it, because we're again, the parties are trying to keep the party faithful in line. They want to somehow cover this up, explain it, smooth it out. So they've got, with control over the corporate media, they can continue to play this little game of volleyball, and everybody with confirmation bias as a Democrat can say he's a racist pig, and everybody on the Republican side can say, well, they didn't really mean it. It was just like a sports rally, and it's unfair to compare us to Nazis and stuff like that. So where are we going to go next on this discussion? I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. I wanted to make sure we had covered that. What's the best we can say about it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think where we are now is just kind of rounding out this particular episode, is talking about, based on where we see everything right now, in the way that these two parties have kind of a stranglehold over things, where they don't want to allow dissident voices.
Right. What
do we, as our individuals in our different differing parties, what do we offer as third party candidates in terms of a solution? How can we get out of this? Yeah, one of the things that we, in preparation for this yesterday, we were talking about grassroots organizations, because one of the things that we're trying to do is organize our parties, organize the groups that we may have affiliations with. For example, in the case of the Libertarian Party, clearly we've got the cannabis group. We've got the people who want to reform alcohol sales and alcohol production, distribution, and that includes craft beer. We want to reduce restrictions for the so-called certificate of need laws. We want to open up the markets to different kinds of medical services. So we've got some natural coalitions that it seems very difficult to pull together. So with all due respect to the Democrats, they have a lot of these groups historically have been fairly open-minded about, if you call wanting to bring in Republicans open-minded, but they've been, some of the people around town who organize events have always been very nice to us, right? And they've invited us to come in to the extent that they are really, whether they're really a grassroots forum or whether they're really AstroTurf, that a lot of people are really behind the scenes working for the Democratic Party. And I think the Republicans have finally just said, we don't really want to participate in these anymore, because they're pretty clearly Democratic front groups. So over the past 2 years, just in the time that I've been running, this election for me has been long. It's something on the order of 18 months, February of last year. But Alan, you also ran in 2017, so you got to see
some of these grassroots
Yeah.
groups, and they've just they've shrunk a little bit. And this event at Heist, even though Andrew Fady tried to he brought in the Libertarians, he brought in our friend Jacob from the Greens, he brought in the Republicans. So Larry Sheehan got up and spoke for the young Republicans, and that's fine. But they were really marginalized. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 Libertarians and maybe 2 or 3 Greens, and maybe 5 or 6 young Republicans there. So this was a Democratic bash.
Yeah.
So everything that's grassroots in this town at this point in time is pretty much Democrats, progressives, Black Political Caucus, League of Women Voters. So this orbit of identity politics groups.
Right.
How do we fight that? I sorry to throw that at you, but that's really the question, and we're going to try to, just as a preview, I think next month we're going to try to arrange kind of a live debate where Alan and I can talk. We're going to invite the Dans. We'll even invite a representative. We're willing to debate one of their representatives if the representatives have the courage to show up and actually talk about ideas and not be tribal about their platform. So we're going to try to do that at William K. Davie Park in South Park area.
That'd be great.
So anyway, let me let you talk for a minute. I don't want to hog the mic here, but what do you think about this grassroots problem?
So I think that the term grassroots has kind of gotten co-opted in and of itself, especially by the Democrats, because you have someone like Dan McCready, right? Who I do my best not to say speak ill of him too much, but he calls his campaign grassroots when he's a multimillionaire who has super rich donors who are donating money to him. So having a grassroots campaign is not just not taking corporate PAC money, right? Literally, you have to be out there on the ground organizing people, and to a certain extent, probably they're doing that.
Just as a side point, I think we can both acknowledge that his professional organization does get out and do the work on the ground. I mean, he didn't do that in 2018 as well, but he's really stepped up his game in that regard. So
that's right. Yeah. But to what I was saying, the term grassroots, I think, is something that we can redefine, and I think the Green Party is trying to do that through just mass organization, basically. And we have to do that through avenues that other parties are not using. And I'm realizing that now as a third-party candidate, you have a lot of these traditional pathways, this existing infrastructure that Democrats and Republicans can just go in and activate on their own. We have to challenge that, because I think about organizations, even like the AFL-CIO, for instance, would back someone like Dan McCready because he's the Democrat, regardless of his stance on organized labor.
Right.
And so we have to find other ways to organize people instead of using these existing groups.
Right. So they're basically backing who they think can win and who they think will have the power to benefit them.
Right. And my theory is that they're doing this to buy political capital for themselves. They would vote against their own interest, against the interests of the people they represent, in order to secure whatever morsel of political capital they can.
That's right. So we all know that the political contribution game is about buying access and favoritism. Just as a little historical aside here, and we should watch the time. Back in the late 80s, during the first savings and loan crisis, there were a group of congressmen who were called the Keating Five, and you can Google this if you want. It's KEATING. But they were all accused of taking donations from this banker named Charles Keating in order to look favorably upon the regulation of this particular bank. So it's a fascinating story. But one of the points made at the time was that they called them the Keating Five. I think the headline in the Wall Street Journal called it the Keating 535. Because really what they were doing was absolutely no different than what anybody else would do. The only thing that Keating did wrong was to be slightly more crass about it, right? So he gave them a donation, and he said, I hope I I hope I get my money's worth, right? So you can, if you give and you should know that because local people have experienced this corruption of Patrick Cannon and his arrest and everything, and we've read about corrupt practices in the past. One of the things that Congress does, the Congress members do, is they get donations, but they don't offer quid pro quo. So you can't ever sell something to somebody. But the fact is, everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows kind of the terms of the sale.
Right.
So really, what's going on is you're going to get a donation from somebody who's going to give you a gazillion dollars, and all their employees are going to give you, portions of that. And then there's going to be legislation that comes up eventually.
Yeah.
And you're going to feel good about that. And having, and that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
And it's not a direct sale; it's just an indirect sale. And
Yeah.
so we don't have laws, we don't have campaign finance rules that can control that,
Right.
Because it's really kind of an indirect. It's not at the same time, and it's not in the same place.
Right.
And so you can't say that there was an act of bribery or there was an act of extortion going on,
Right.
because it wasn't at the same time in the same place. So this Keating thing, again, just to remind you, it was just very crass. Here's the money. Here's what I want. You can't do that, but you can say, I'm going to give you a bunch of money, and 6 months later, I might want something, maybe,
Yeah.
and then you're going to get a call saying, you remember?
Yeah.
And you're not going to need to be reminded that their person was a donor.
Right.
You're just going to know, because that buys access.
It's true.
Anyway, I'm sorry to be so cynical about government and the way it works. I know that offends your sensibilities.
Well, I am an idealist at heart, but I'm also a realist, right?
Yeah.
One thing I think anybody watching might want to check out is the American Anti-Corruption Act, because
Okay.
that's legislation that they're trying to get passed. That
And that's live right now. The Anti-Corruption
so
Act.
the legislation is not in Congress right now. There's a website, I think it's called represent.us,
Okay.
and it's a group that's pushing for this legislation that's supposed to combat these types of things that you described,
Yeah.
where people can pay to play, they can pay for
Right.
access, and
Yeah.
combating a lot of the lobbying, revolving door policies, and things
Right.
like that. Who
Right.
knows if it can pass? But
Yeah. So that just brings us to another topic, which is the revolving
Oh,
door, right?
right,
So
yeah.
so one of the reasons we think that the parties are entrenched, and why they've got a lot to lose, and why there's so much to gain, and why your hair is on fire about Trump. You can't think of anything good that he does. And you can't, and if you're on the opposite spectrum, Ilhan Omar, you can't think of anything positive that she might do, or
Right.
AOC. You're just completely inflamed by anything that she says.
Yeah.
It's because of this. It's because they need to hold power and they need tribal loyalty. So they don't want to talk about the fact that they're fiscally irresponsible, which I just mentioned, but they also don't want to talk about this revolving door.
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about the fact that the real estate in Washington, D.C. has grown off the charts,
Mhm.
that it is a cesspool of corruption. And it's all about jobs for insiders and contractors and subcontractors. I happen to think that the big story over the last 15 years is really the Patriot Act and the growth of DHS and ICE, which we've touched on many times. But a lot of people who, and our own local congressmen and senators, whether they're Robert Pittenger, he's got some kind of weird anti-terrorist, anti-China, anti-Iran contract. It'd be interesting to look into that. I also think that state congressman, I can't remember whether he was the House or the Senate, Bill Brawley, is very much interested in human trafficking, human sex trafficking. So there's a lot of sex panic among people here who live in the Bible Belt, and they're very responsive to this kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And so, does he have a special subcontract with the DHS? I'm just asking that question. If anybody could do the research on this, it would be very interesting to know. I mean, I see him like once a week. I run into him, but he's very fixated on this issue.
Right.
And so I think there's a lot of money that comes into the state for things like this from DHS, also voting systems, cybersecurity systems. So I consider that a form of corruption when their budgets have expanded year after year. It's crazy how much money is going in. All of these contracts for border security is all about, people on the inside who got these contracts for special, drug sniffing machines, like Star Trek tricorders, beep, 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 beep. They're, which we don't know whether they work or not. I mean, they sound so science fiction-y. We don't, very low credibility in my estimation. So again, I've talked a little longer than I need to. So Alan, you're welcome to let us know. I'm not sure what's our timing here.
So we are at about. I started 5 minutes late or so.
Yeah.
So we're just about there. The one thing I would add to what you said,
Yeah.
is local issues. I know that I've seen happening in terms of corruption or the question of corruption.
Right.
We see a lot of education privatization, especially through Bill Brawley. I know that he faced a lot of criticism over the municipal charter school bill.
Okay,
There was
interesting.
that.
Yeah.
The other issue that you see is you look at someone like Senator Dan Blue, who's a Democrat, who sponsored legislation that heavily favored Duke Energy. Not only did he sponsor it, they actually helped write the bill. His law firm that he works for is also working for Duke Energy on the Atlantic Coast Pipeline.
I am shocked. Well, yeah. Okay. So there's a little bit of more local corruption. Maybe we can have a whole show about this, and we might even be able to invite some investigative guests, because I'm only looking at because we're running for federal office.
Right.
I'm sort of focused on the fact that there's a lot of money coming out of DC to pay us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't do. I guess one of the things we can end on here is one of the topics we touched on yesterday is this other side effect of the big power play and the big money, because we really saw that in last year's election and the effect on rural voters.
Right.
The idea that you can make $5 a vote by going out and knocking on someone's door, then following up and making sure they get the ballot in the mail, and that's a good deal. And Republicans did it, and they were filling out ballots and stuff, and they did sketchy things. But we know that Democrats do it too, and in that sense, it's perfectly legal. I wish I had 100 libertarians, who are calling people and saying, vote, and if you don't vote, I'll come over and watch you while you vote, and I'll walk you to the mailbox. We would both do that. We would both hire groups of people to get out the vote and encourage people to vote and say, did you get an absentee ballot? Could you fill it out? Could you take, and to nag people. And if we had the budget, we would do that. We would do things like that. So there's nothing wrong with that. But the distortion comes in when, like you say, McCready's got those millions of his own personal money and the big donors. And he's paying, I estimated when I looked at the number of votes, at least in 2018, and including his money that his campaign spent and the dark money, he was paying upwards of $70 a vote. So guess what? That's a good deal during election season if you're looking for some part-time work, because just if you think of it by the hour, how many votes you can get in an hour, and you're going to get $4 or $5 in an hour, for each one, and you can do 3 or 4 or 5 in an hour if you're really, that's $25 an hour, right? For doing, for just talking to people and encouraging them and nagging them and selling them this idea.
Yeah.
So that's a real inducement. Unfortunately, it's also an inducement to cheat.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the end. I'll let you have the last word on this topic, and then we'll close down.
Yeah, I just think for us to make a difference, we have to do things that are unconventional, because the conventional pathways don't work for us. And people in the establishment should be nervous, because candidates like us are scrappy, and we know how to do things in unconventional ways. And
we're mean trollers. Well, I'm a mean troller. Alan's kind of kind of.
I
He's not as mean as me.
yeah, but I'll still troll. I will troll. And that is not beneath me. But yeah, we have to go about things a different way.
Yeah.
In order to change things.
Well, thank you so much for listening. If you've gotten through our whole 30 minutes, we're going to try to do a show next week on military. We're going to have some interesting things to say about the state of the world, what's happening in Iran, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela. There's so much to talk about. I don't even know if we can do it in 30 minutes, but we're going to try to have a nice show for you then. Anyway. Signing off from Julia, so the Jeff and Alan show, or as Alan likes to call it,
The Alan and Jeff show.
the Alan and Jeff show.
Because that's what it's called.
That's right. We're gonna have a meeting of the board, and we're gonna determine the final outcome. Anyway, thank you so much. Bye bye.
So right here.